Talk 360. Talk 360 for in-depth analysis on the week's news with Latif.
Bure kabisa, they're worse than gangsters robbing their employer. There are very many comments here, but many of them, I'll tell you, but just by looking at them, Ekwe, many of them are coming from people who definitely seem dissatisfied with one or two aspects of the 10th Parliament, which are the ones that have just blotted any positive that you may have had, which is the issue of remuneration and the issue of watering down some of the key constitutional bills. We've dealt with remuneration. Let's talk about the constitutional bills. And I just want to give Atsango, Chesoni, give us some of the bills in which you feel that as you sat down at the Committee of Experts on Constitutional Review, as you were drafting this constitution, you thought this would work best if MPs went this way, if we had legislation that goes this way in spirit and letter of this constitution. But then what's come out of Parliament has been a bit different. Or completely contrary?
I think the bills around integrity, campaign financing, I think those are the areas where there's areas of concern. I personally don't come from the school of thought, by the way, that we actually needed the integrity bills in order to implement Chapter 6. As far as I'm concerned, Chapter 6 is self-implementing, and that whatever else is done is meant to be an addition to what is already in there. But I think, given some of the very robust legislation that was put in place in the late 1990s through into the last decade, because at that time Kenyans coming off of the heels of Goldenberg were actually very concerned about corruption. I feel that we've gone behind. Yeah. If you look at the Public Officers and Ethics Act and the kind of spirit that led to it being passed in the first place, we've got into a situation where I think we're pussyfooting around corruption. And I think, with all due respect to the parliamentarians and the current, the ones who are just about to go home, I think they've taken for granted some of the things that were very important and that actually kept this country going, despite a constitutional framework that was actually very poor. So instead of strengthening some of those governance issues around integrity that would have made us more effective in dealing with corruption, they've actually rolled back on those gains. Maybe because also some of them for the first time now are the ones under the spotlight. So it then raises a question about, for some of the older members, whether or not this was something they were actually ever genuinely committed to, or whether it was something that they were concerned about because at that point in time they were not the beneficiaries.
One of the eaters.
Yeah, so I would like to see an environment whereby everybody across the board, and this also applies to voters, by the way, it's not just about the parliamentarians, whereby everybody across the board in this country understands that corruption is actually not in our interests, and that effective mechanisms to deal with it are put in place, and we don't resort to this thing whereby when it's somebody who either we identify with or it's us that are caught out, we then undermine the structures that that would ensure that we actually have accountable leadership.
Let's get some bit of response from Ekwe Ethuro on this. On the issue of corruption and fighting corruption, the EACC Act came in and everybody feels like it was completely watered down. The whole issue of MPs and public officers declaring their wealth and checking how they're gaining more wealth, how their wealth is growing when they're serving in public service. All these issues seem to have basically just passed and gone. What happened?
I think I agree with Atsango on the corruption business. I think we have mishandled the corruption matters as a nation, not just as a parliament. Because I also want to make the distinction. They said, there are bills that are private members' bills, which we bring. That's not the ideal situation. The ideal situation is that the government brings the bills. After taking into account policy considerations, experience, because, government has the bureaucracy and the largesse to try to do and all the arms of government to bring to bear on a particular matter so that you can propose a legislation. So the parliament really, on behalf of the people, as people's representatives, they have one final look to say, is this government committed to what brought us to government? It has that issue. So what happened to me, one, I think this parliament came at a time it had other considerations. You know, post-conflict is the way I would characterize the 10th Parliament. We are more concerned with that agenda for business than really the traditional issues of corruption. And of course, corruption in Kenya is a big animal. You know, it is well entrenched. It fights back. So I think when you have a crowded agenda, you lose it. While in the previous parliaments, especially immediately when Kenya became a multi-party state, you know, from the 92 parliament, so you had a crop of leaders that really came on a platform of serious reforms.
But I want to just put you on the spot.
The third one I want to mention before you is also, I think what really killed this particular thing is the conduct of the people appointed to the body. I know the last fiasco was really about how even some of the members who are being suspected were being treated. You know, there was more issue in the media before even the investigations are complete. You cannot, simple elementary business, you cannot put everything on the media and you want to tell me you're investigating. People will always fight back.
But that's the thing. You know, we seem to have lost the issue of the institution and the personalities in the institution. There was a lot of spirited debate for and against, mainly against Justice Ringera. Then you brought in Lumumba, and Lumumba stayed for about a year and two, and then because Lumumba started saying, I want to investigate some members of parliament, next thing we are seeing is that on the floor of the House, there's a lot of vitriol against Dr. Lumumba. And from that point on, when the EACC bill came to the floor of the House, many of the things that had been proposed in the EACC bill were just watered down, basically made to, they were just nothing. You removed the teeth from the dog.
Our beef on the Justice Rivera appointment was that we said there was a process in which you appoint somebody. And so if there was going to be a reappointment, the same process must be followed. We had no issue even on the persona of Justice retired Ringera. But the way the appointing authority went about it to us was just impunity itself, was just corruption itself. And I think there you must commend Parliament. Parliament stood firm.
Yeah, I actually think that the Ringera issue was not the problem. I think where the plot got lost was in respect of the Lumumba, the dealing with Lumumba, first of all personalizing that, and then throwing out the baby basically with the bathwater. I think there was a bigger issue at hand, and I wish it had not been approached in that way. And with all due respect again to the parliamentarians, I fear that there are some who are hiding behind the issue of approach because they themselves might have been implicated. And so, I think we have to get to a point where as a country we have enough of a critical mass of people who care enough about this country that whether or not they themselves end up falling on that sword, they put in place institutions and allow processes that will go into place that would be able to actually ensure that we have an accountable system. And so I feel that with the whole corruption process, we lost the process. And there is a correlation between corruption and Agenda 4, because it's one of the long-term issues. But I think that point was missed somewhere in all of this. It's one of the long-term issues that has led to us having a bad governance situation. And so by watering down the provisions and also treating the integrity provisions in the Constitution as if they apply only to the appointed, to appointed state officers, it's problematic. These standards were placed there and were placed there for all state officers. Basically, if there is something which we would not allow, because on the issue of integrity, there's a uniformity. It's not like professional credentials. You can comfortably say that maybe somebody who wants to be a judge, for example, must demonstrate that they have a law degree. And so therefore there will be a difference between the kind of people you choose to be your judge and the kind of people that you choose to be your controller of the budget, for example.
Right.
But there is one thing that everybody who holds state office must be able to demonstrate, and that's integrity. And it doesn't matter whether or not they're a member of a county assembly, whether or not they're a member of the National Assembly, whether or not they're a senator, whether or not they're a governor, whether it's the president, across the board. Because these people hold our country in their hands. And unfortunately, because of the kind of trust we've placed in them, the standard for them is higher. It's sad, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
You know, when you put yourself forward for that kind of a job. And so I would have liked to have seen a far more robust approach and a willingness. In the same way, with the tax debate, they were willing to suffer the consequences of not being able to get, you know, still being taxed midway. I would have liked to see that same kind of robustness on the question of integrity.
Some zeal and some commitment.
Let me really speak to this. We must make a distinction between our own personal preferences and the law itself. I mean, the Constitution itself says, if I have a court case and the court case has not been determined, and even if it were to be determined and I appeal against that judgment, until the appellate process is exhausted, I am not guilty. But there are people in this country who want to make you believe you are guilty because you have been taken to court. I was taken to court myself recently on the issue of Baragway for just speaking the kind of being vibrant in the way I deal with things that affect my people. And so if you really want to use that against everybody who has been taken to court, in fact, I personally appreciated why the due process must be followed. And so I don't believe that we actually mutilated the integrity chapter. The Constitution is very clear, it is intact. It did legislation to give it some enabling effect. We did what we did, and I think that is where we are. Two, you know, this country now is really independent. It has free flow of information. We have established independent commissions. They need to start to learn to work with the government. It's not enough to call a press conference and accuse us.
And pontificate.
And then expect the same people who are accused to go there and take your case. I brought a bill on the offices of minister where the entire civil society had done a demo to Uhuru Park, including mine and the late Professor Wangare, and they actually tear gassed. When I brought the bill, which was actually because I felt I'm from civil society myself, I felt surely the reason why I'm here is not to be like them, is to give effect to the expression. Not a single person would come to my aid. I had to do that thing alone. So you wonder what is really the interest. Are we just talking for the sake of talking, or do we want to make things happen for this country?
Chapter 6 is not just about criminality. So I'm actually not, it's not the criminality component I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about ethics and conduct. And where we have people who have a history whereby through their conduct, they have demonstrated a lack of respect for the rule of law. So where we have instances like that, I think we have to apply the same standards. We can't be saying that we're sending the Deputy Chief Justice back. We are demanding that the Deputy Chief Justice no longer be allowed to hold office on account of her allegedly pinching somebody's nose, and therefore engaging in conduct which is considered to have brought her office into disrepute. And then we don't apply similar standards to people who are in elective office. So, you know, I'm sorry, it's double standards. They would not consider for those officers, because it's parliamentarians we rely on to vet most of these other people. So they would not consider for those officers people who have the same, I would like to see consistency there. People who have the same type of track records treated in the same type of a way.
Yeah, surely that is completely easy and straightforward, isn't it?
But I have no problem with that. But she cannot also just say it's only integrity issues. So, in fact, let me tell you, we are losing these integrity issues because if you get to what is in the public domain, is like the criminality of everything. And when even people talk as if we are not following the due process of law, even people I expect to be the ones actually enforcing. You know, I may not like you, but if I'm in a position to know that this is really the position, I should defend you. And then we'll be able to see your impartiality, your fairness. But in this country, as long as it's something against the MPs, the public mood is against us, generated by the media and everybody joins the chorus.